Ammon Bundy here. Wanted to talk about the Hammonds, give a little bit of an update. The Hammonds are a wonderful people. They are salt of the earth. I can't say enough about how good of people they are. I wish everybody could go out there and they could see and spend time with Dwight and Susie, spend time with Stephen, and see how humble and how good of people they are. See how they love ranching, that they love the earth. See how they care about their neighbors and how their neighbors talk about them. These are good people. One thing to note about the Hammond situation is that the Harney Basin is a large basin, and at one time it runs 60,000 head of cattle. And there was all kinds of ranchers, private ranches all across the whole Harney Basin. It's beautiful cattle country. Much better than the much easier than the ranch I came from. Anyhow, it was all privately owned at one time, all of it. And now, other than the Hammonds and a few others, it's primarily owned by the federal government. And how did that happen? How did it go from private property to being owned by the federal government? It's crucial that you understand what's going on here, what this issue is truly about. It's about our federal government taking over private properties adversely, or using the taxpayers' dollars after they ruin the ranchers to buy it. And there is no way to dispute the fact that at one time that land was developed by ranchers and was private property, and now it's claimed by the U.S. government. Now the issue here is the federal government does not have authority from the people. It is not in the Constitution for them to go inside states and create wildlife refuges, national parks, because there are certain rules that they have to follow in order to do that. And those rules are in Article 1, Section 817. In essence, it says that if the federal government is going to own land inside a state, they have to do three things. They have to get consent from the state legislatures, they have to purchase it, and they can only use it for the erection of forts, magazines, dockyards, and other needful buildings. You'll notice that it does not say wilderness areas, national parks, refuge areas, or even vast lands of vast open lands. It doesn't say that. It has very specific purposes in which the land can be used. It has to get the consent from the state legislatures, and they have to purchase it from the proper owner. These lands have not been properly ceded to the federal government, and they're not being used for the proper purposes. And that is why the Hammonds are in the situation that they're in. Because if we had adhered to the Constitution and we would not allow the federal government to step outside its bounds, the Hammonds would never have the federal government trying to take their land. And if there was an issue of fires or anything else, then it would have been a county issue. And the county would have taken it up, and they would have been tried by a jury of their peers and of the county, the area, and they would have received justice. And they wouldn't have had to been abused and intimidated, and their ranches wouldn't have been taken. They wouldn't have had to pay the federal government hundreds of thousands of dollars in statutory fines. They would have been forced to give up first right of refusals to the BLM, so that when they finally put them out of business, where they can't survive any longer, they have to sell it to the Bureau of Land Management. Okay? Now, many of you probably have seen a letter from the Sheriff David Ward, Harney County Sheriff. I openly am extremely disappointed with the sheriff. He testified to me many, many times that he was a constitutional sheriff. And then in his letter, he pretty much says that The Hammonds have seen their day in court. They have been given due process, so get over it. He also alluded that there was a lot of misinformation from the internet, and I don't know what he's talking about, but as you will see and you could read through on the bundyranch.blogspot.com, that everything that I've put down has been either verified through the court documents or has had at least 2 witnesses. And he chooses to ignore them. But all of that is a secondary matter. The primary matter is this, that the federal government has violated the Constitution in many ways. And the list goes on and on. I do want to remind you that the Hammonds have been tried as terrorists, and I want you to understand the reason why they've been tried as terrorists. Because our federal government is setting a precedent here, that anybody who stands against them in these takings of land and resource, or probably in any other way, they will try them as terrorists, as an enemy to the country. And then it holds a minimum sentence of 5 years. They'll put them in prison. They'll ruin their lives, ruin everything that they have, and then they'll actually end up taking it anyway. And this is to set a precedence. And so the Hammonds are very afraid right now. They're afraid that the American people are not going to stand for them. And so they have chosen to be afraid and to not speak right now. But I want you to understand that even though this is for the Hammonds, this is a much bigger issue. This is for my children. This is for your children. This is for our grandchildren. If the government takes the private property, there will be nothing left for them. Everything comes from the land. This paper that's in this book, these papers, the camera, computer, the desk, the wall, the wood, the homes, our clothes, everything. Everything comes from the earth. And if they can get control of the land and resources, if they can control, for example, the water, then they can have full control over the people. If they can control the resources, the minerals coming out of the ground, that the logging, the grazing, the food, if they can control these things, then they have ultimate power over the people. And see, this is what the ancient, if you will, conquerors understood. That all they had to do is go in and control the land and the resources, and they can control the whole people. They become dependent upon them. And so this is a tactic. They're modern day conquerors. They found a way to do it that supposedly is legal, although we know it's not because it doesn't abide by the supreme law of the land. But this is how they've done it. And we need to wake up to this. They're after the land and the resources because wealth, all wealth generates from the land. And we need to wake up. The federal government is not supposed to own property inside the state unless it's been properly ceded. And it's very limited what they can own. And so this is basically my update. The Hammonds need your help. They need you to stand, whether they're willing, whether they're afraid or not, whether they're willing to stand or not. And by standing with the Hammonds, we stand for our children and our children's children. And it's time to unite. It's time to get educated. We need to straighten this out. And I want to thank you for your time. And I want you to know that I love my neighbors. I love the Hammonds. And I love the Lord. And I feel justified in defending the Hammonds, even if they do not have the strength and the courage right now to stand for themselves. So thank you for your time.